Malachi Brooks had always been a man of few words, the kind of man who preferred the solitude of his ranch to the noise of town. But when he saw the deed in his hand, he felt a flicker of excitement. The deed was for 50 acres of prime grazing land he could work, build on, and perhaps make something of. The price he paid was almost laughable, barely enough to buy a horse anywhere else in the territory. But to Malachi, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to start fresh, far away from the memories of his past. 3 days after purchasing the land, however, Malachi stood at the edge of his new property, staring out into the barren land that now belonged to him. The sky was clear, the sun bright, but there was something unsettling about the place. It wasn't the silence, it was the unnatural stillness. The air was thick, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. It didn't take long for Malachi to realize that the vultures circling above were not just scavengers, they were watching him. The land agent's smile had been too wide, his handshake too eager when Malachi bought the property. And when Malachi asked why the land had been empty for years, the man had simply said that the previous owners had moved on to better opportunities. But as Malachi stood there, the creeping feeling in his gut told him that something about the Thornfield tract wasn't right. There was something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface of this land. Malachi gently guided his horse through the rusted gate that hung crooked on its hinges. The posts of the fence leaned at odd angles, some completely rotted through, others bearing deep gouges that looked like claw marks too large to be from any animal he knew. Malachi's horse shifted nervously beneath him, ears flicking back and forth, a subtle but distinct sign that the animal was uneasy. Malachi had seen his horse behave calmly in thunderstorms, river crossings, and even the presence of wild animals, but now the horse was on edge. And Malachi felt it too, the unease that seemed to come from deep within the land itself. "Come on, old girl," Malachi muttered to his horse, trying to calm both of them. But the truth was, he wasn't sure what was wrong. He had spent the last of his savings on this land, burning every bridge back east to make a new life out here. Turning back wasn't an option. There was no going back to the life he had known. He was in this for better or worse. As Malachi approached the main house, the feeling of unease only grew. The house sat in a shallow valley, its windows dark and empty. From this distance, it looked like any old ranch house, a solid structure, built with good timber and a stone foundation. But as he drew closer, something felt off. The house seemed like a painting with proportions slightly wrong, an illusion that made Malachi's instincts buzz with discomfort. The door stood wide open, revealing only darkness inside. Malachi dismounted, his boots crunching over broken glass scattered around the entrance. He took a moment to examine the house. The porch was cracked, the floorboards split in places, and dark stains spread across them in irregular patterns. The air was thick with the smell of decay, something metallic mixed with the rank scent of old blood. The walls were scratched with deep, parallel marks that ran from the ground to the roof, like claws had raked across them. The furniture, though overturned and broken, had a layer of dust on it that suggested it had been here for months, maybe even years, without being touched. But what was most disturbing to Malachi was the fact that someone had tried to clean up after the violence that had occurred here. The walls showed scrub marks where someone had attempted to wash away the stains, but the evidence remained stubbornly visible. As he moved deeper into the house, the reality of what had happened here began to settle over him like a dark cloud. This place wasn't just abandoned, it had been abandoned after something terrible had happened. The silence in the house was unnerving. Malachi had lived through his share of quiet moments on his ranch, but this was different. It was as though even the wind refused to blow across this place. He checked the corners of the room, rifle in hand, just out of habit. The silence around him was complete and it felt unnatural. Suddenly, a sound broke through the stillness, the sound of horses approaching. Malachi moved to the window and saw 4 riders picking their way carefully along the same path he had just taken. He recognized the lead rider instantly, Rufus Callahan, a man whose reputation in town was as solid as stone, known for his ruthlessness and ambition. Callahan owned most of the surrounding land and had made no secret of his displeasure when news spread that Malachi had bought the Thornfield tract. Callahan's men followed him closely, their eyes scanning the property as if looking for something. Malachi stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, ready for whatever came next. "You picked a hell of a place to call home, Brooks," Callahan called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Most folks would have turned around by now." Malachi didn't flinch. "Most folks didn't pay good money for this land," he replied calmly. "I intend to get my investment's worth." Callahan's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Investment, friend? You bought yourself a graveyard. The smart thing would be to ride back to town, find that land agent, and demand your money back while you still can." Malachi didn't back down. "What happened here?" he asked directly. "The land agent claimed the previous owners just moved on, but this place tells a different story." The silence stretched between them, and Malachi noticed Callahan's men shift uneasily in their saddles, their hands drifting closer to their weapons. Callahan spurred his horse forward, a few steps closer, his cold eyes never leaving Malachi's face. "Some stories are better left buried," he said quietly, his voice carrying a strange weight. "The Henderson family tried to make a go of this place 5 years back. Good people, worked hard, minded their own business. Then one morning, neighbors found what was left of them scattered across these same floorboards you're standing on." Malachi's stomach twisted. "What killed them?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Callahan replied, his eyes narrowing. "Some say it was Comanche raiders. Others claim it was claimed jumpers after their water rights. But the truth is, nobody knows for certain. And nobody wants to find out." Malachi's mind raced as the full weight of Callahan's words sank in. This wasn't just an abandoned property, it was a cursed one. A place where families had been murdered, where something dark had unfolded. And now Malachi had inherited it. Malachi stood in the middle of the porch, the weight of what he had just learned pressing down on him like a heavy fog. The sheriff's words hung in the air, his warning clear but laden with an unmistakable urgency. Malachi had entered this land with the hope of finding a fresh start, a place to leave behind the shackles of his past. But now, as the eerie silence of the property settled in around him, he realized that the land had its own secrets, and those secrets were about to pull him deeper into a fight he had never expected. He turned to look at the house once more. The dark, empty windows stared back at him, as if the structure itself was waiting for him to enter and uncover what had been buried for years. The stains on the porch, the deep gouges on the fence posts, the shattered glass, they all told the same story. This land was haunted, and Malachi was its latest victim. But no matter how badly his instincts screamed at him to turn back, he couldn't. This was his land now, and he wasn't about to let Callahan or anyone else scare him off. With a determined sigh, Malachi grabbed his rifle and stepped down from the porch. The evening air was cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the turmoil swirling inside him. He walked through the property, his boots crunching over the dry earth, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The cattle were nowhere to be seen, and the land felt even emptier now, as though something was missing. His mind drifted back to the words of the sheriff and Marks, to the disturbing truths they had revealed. Callahan had been behind all of it, every murder, every disappearance, every family that had tried to settle on this land and failed. The horse hooves had faded away in the distance, but the unsettling tension in the air remained. Malachi could feel it in his bones. He was being watched. He quickened his pace, his thoughts turning dark as he approached the barn. The structure was in far better shape than the house, but it still carried a sense of neglect. He stepped inside, his rifle held at the ready. The smell of hay and dust hung in the air, but it was the faint sound of rustling behind the hay bales that caught his attention. Malachi held his breath and carefully moved toward the sound. His heart beat faster as he took a step forward, his fingers tightening around the rifle. The rustling stopped as soon as he moved, and Malachi froze. He listened carefully, his senses sharp. The barn was silent again, but there was something there, something he couldn't see but could feel in the pit of his stomach. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice carrying through the barn. There was no response, just the stillness of the place. He took another step forward, and as his boot scraped against the floor, something shifted in the shadows. A figure stepped out from behind the hay bales, causing Malachi to raise his rifle instinctively. The man was tall, his face weathered and rough from years of exposure to the elements. His eyes, though, were sharp, calculating, as though he had seen too many things that made him wary of trusting anyone. The man raised his hand slowly in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, Brooks," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm not here to start trouble. Just looking for answers like you." Malachi didn't lower his rifle, but he studied the stranger with growing suspicion. "Who are you?" "Name's Luke," the man said, his hand still raised. "I've been keeping an eye on this place for a long time. Thought you might need some company." His eyes flicked nervously to the barn doors, and Malachi could tell the man wasn't just here to chat. Malachi kept his rifle steady, but a wave of unease washed over him. "What do you know about this place?" Luke's gaze shifted to the barn's open doors, then back to Malachi. "More than I'd like to," he said quietly. "You're asking the right questions, Brooks, but you're standing in the wrong place. This land has a way of driving men mad." Malachi's grip tightened on his rifle. He had no time for cryptic nonsense. "I'm not asking questions for nothing. This place is mine now, and I'm going to get to the bottom of what happened here. Every last detail." Luke seemed to consider that for a moment. "Fine," he said, lowering his hands. "You want the truth, Brooks? You won't like it? Callahan isn't the only one with blood on his hands here. There are other things at work, things people don't talk about." The unease in Malachi's stomach turned to full-blown anxiety. "What do you mean?" Luke looked around again, his gaze lingering on the barn doors. "There's a reason this land is so cheap. It's not just the murder of those families. It's something else, something older, something buried beneath the soil." Malachi narrowed his eyes. "You're talking about the land being cursed?" Luke let out a bitter laugh. "Cursed? No, but there's a dark history here that's been covered up for a reason. There's something buried in the earth that Callahan's been trying to get his hands on for years, and he'll do anything to get it." Malachi's mind raced as the weight of Luke's words sank in. "What are you talking about? What's buried here?" Luke's face darkened, and he leaned in closer. "Silver, pure, uncut silver, the kind that could make a man rich beyond his wildest dreams. But the price of it ... it's single quotes S too high. Every family that came here looking to settle, they were killed because of it. Callahan's been covering up the truth for years, killing anyone who gets too close." Malachi's heart skipped a beat. He had thought about the land's history, but never considered something like this. Silver? The thought was too wild to grasp, but something about Luke's tone made him believe it. This wasn't just about land or cattle. This was about something far more dangerous. "You're saying the Hendersons, the Morrisons, the others, they all died because of silver?" Malachi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Luke nodded solemnly. "That's right, and Callahan? He knows exactly what's buried here. He's been buying up every plot of land around this one, trying to corner the market. The problem is he's too greedy. He wants it all." Malachi's eyes flicked to the brass button in his pocket, the one he had found earlier. The same button that had once belonged to a soldier, one of the men who had likely killed the families who had lived here before. It was becoming clear now. Callahan had been using force, violence, and manipulation to cover up a secret one that could make him the wealthiest man in the territory. "Why are you telling me this?" Malachi asked, his voice low with suspicion. Luke's expression softened, but there was still an edge of warning in his eyes. "Because you're not like the others. You don't just roll over when someone tells you to. You've got the heart of a man who wants to see justice done. You're the only one who can stop Callahan." Malachi hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't know if he could trust Luke, but the stranger's words were starting to make sense. Everything was connected: the murders, the land, the silver. And now Malachi found himself in the middle of it all. "Help me, and I'll make sure Callahan doesn't get away with it," Malachi said, his tone resolute. Luke nodded. "I'm with you, but you need to be careful. Callahan has eyes everywhere. You can't trust anyone, not even the sheriff." As the two men exchanged looks, a new sense of urgency filled the air. Malachi knew what he had to do now. The stakes were higher than ever. But the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and deception. The sun had set by the time they heard the sound of hooves approaching again. This time, it wasn't the sheriff or Callahan's men. These were different riders, more determined, more relentless. Malachi's hand instinctively reached for his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. The hunt for justice had begun,